Welcome back to International Star Media, the Gold Star Standard. At the Gold Star Standard. Reactions, reviews, and news you can use. Once again, I am your host, International Yada, for the records and the dollars. Check it out. Back with another one. We got Diddy. They're hitting with another charge. A few charges. In his third superseding indictment. Force, fraud, coercion, violence, or the threats of violence. This is what we've been talking about over here at International Star Media, the Gold Star Standard. Human trafficking, sex trafficking. You don't want to get it caught up in this. These are the charges that can get you life in prison. These are the charges they use to throw you away. These are the charges they're using on Sean Combs. Let's check it out. Here we go.
He has just been hit with a new third superseding indictment. What's new? What's different? Why now? Well, I'll tell you what, there's some significant things that we got to talk about. Now, the main theme doesn't change here. Federal prosecutors from the Southern District of New York have accused him and are continuing to accuse him of essentially running a criminal enterprise that focused on his apparently insatiable sexual appetite. Combs was indicted last fall with 3 counts: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, transportation to engage in prostitution. And since the first grand jury indictment...
Pay attention now. Pay attention.
Focused on his apparently insatiable sexual appetite. Combs was indicted last fall with 3 counts: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, transportation to engage in prostitution. And since the first grand jury indictment came down, we have seen superseding indictments that have changed some of the language, maybe given hints to what evidence or what kind of evidence the prosecution might have against the music mogul. But now we have this third superseding indictment. And this one...
Pay attention to the third superseding indictment. Human trafficking, sex trafficking, force, fraud, or coercion. They trying to get rid of this man. Not sure if he did it or not, but I know they trying to get rid of this man. Pay attention.
Actually adds 2 new charges and has a little bit of a difference in language. So we're going to break it down, and also we're going to break down the government just filed papers with the court asking to protect the identities of certain alleged victims who plan to testify at trial. Now, to be clear, Combs has always adamantly denied any wrongdoing, the charges, any of the allegations he faces in the numerous civil lawsuits that he faces.
And also remember, these charges are connected to flying women and or men in and out for the purpose of... Let's go.
And he said he looks forward to his day in court. All right, so I'm not going to do this alone. We have with us friend of the show, former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Nima, so good to see you. Just the person I wanted to talk to about this. We have so much to get into. First, though, you got to talk to me about this. Combs scheduled to go to trial in May, next month, May 5th, weeks away, really getting to the wire here.
And that's something else, too. They just hit him with these new charges a few weeks to a month before his trial is scheduled to start. I hope y'all paying attention to what's going on. And I hope nobody out there is just pay attention. International Star Media, the Gold Star Standard. At the Gold Star Standard. Let's go.
Why file this right now? Let's just start there, the timing of it.
Jesse, great to be on as always. And I guess better late than never when it comes to the Department of Justice. But really, 1 month before trial is late. And that's why accompanying the superseding indictment, the third superseding indictment, is a letter to the court essentially saying, this doesn't change anything. We've already produced the evidence in discovery. We've produced the witness statements, the victim statements under the Jenks Act. So Diddy and his team, they have everything because they know the judge is probably going to give them a hard time for this indictment so close to the trial. Now, we know that Diddy doesn't want to push the trial because he's in custody without bail. But typically, if you go to the grand jury this late, this is a very good excuse and a reason for the defense to ask for a continuance.
Absolutely. And I think it would have been granted. I really think it would have been granted. Now, not saying that's what they're going to do here. And I'll get into the defense's response or lack thereof, which I think is interesting. But now I want to get into the indictment. So, first of all, this new indictment makes the same overall claim. Quote, for decades, the defendant abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual...
Pay attention to the language now. For decades, he abused, coerced. Pay attention to the language. Because the law of the language, or the language of the law, is what's going to get you caught up. Pay attention.
Desires to protect his reputation and conceal his conduct. And a prior superseding indictment updated the date range for the allegations against Combs, pushing it back from 2008 to 2004, claiming that between 2004 and 2024 is what's referred to as Combs' enterprise committed various crimes like arson, kidnapping, drug possession. And to convict Combs on the racketeering charge, the government is relying on trying to prove these underlying crimes that were committed in furtherance of the enterprise.
He just said from 2004 to 2024 is when Combs' enterprise were committing these crimes. That's 20 years. A 20-year span is what they trying to hit him with, and said he's been doing this for 20 years. Not a penalty for sex trafficking is life. They can give you up to life in prison. They said this man been doing this for 20 years. And all they need is somebody to say you forced them, you used fraud, you coerced them, or you use violence or threats of violence to get them to do what you wanted them to do. All they got to do is say that this happened to them. And you may be in a world of trouble for flying somebody out, that was willing to be flew out and spend time with you for the purpose of, I'm not sure what the purposes was, but you can probably guess it.
Bitch, you guessed it.
And you could be charged with sex trafficking or human trafficking, and they can give you life in prison. Take heed and pay attention. Let's go.
Now, going back to the new indictment, the third superseding indictment, as Nima just mentioned, a letter submitted to Judge Arun Subramanian by acting U.S. Attorney Matthew Podolsky lays out what this is about, lays out the three big differences in this new filing. Quote, the third superseding indictment contains three substantive changes to the charged offenses. First, count 4, which is, by the way, a new count.
Pay attention.
Charges an additional substantive count of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion with respect to victim 2. Victim 2 was previously identified as a victim of sex trafficking in count 1 of the second superseding indictment. And if you look at count 1 in the second superseding indictment, which is racketeering conspiracy, it reads in part, Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims, including but not limited to 3 female victims, victim 1, victim 2, and victim 3, to engage in commercial sex acts. In connection with the commercial sex acts, Combs provided the victim.
They said he used coercion, which he enticed them to come down there, to fly out to him and engage in acts. This is what's going on. Pay attention. Really pay attention. These people will throw you away.
With, among other things, monetary payments, career opportunities, and payment of rent and housing expenses. Okay, so again, that was count 1 in the second superseding indictment.
Not only did they say he flew them out, they say he flew them out to pay their rent, to make sure they was taken care of. I'm sure these ladies and or men or whatever didn't think that they was he just picked them out of all the people in the world to fly them out and take care of them financially. Sounds like it was some willing participants in this. That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like it was some willing participants that wanted to get flued out. You know how much y'all watch Instagram. Y'all pay attention to the social medias and how much a lot of these ladies want to just get flued out. And you getting flued out by the man himself, Diddy. And he promised to take care of you, pay your bills, which he did. Let's get back to this. I don't know. Let's get back to this.
But now, Combs is facing a new individual sex trafficking charge against victim 2. And it reads, quote, from at least in or about 2021 up to and including in or about 2024 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Sean Combs, and then it says, recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, and maintained victim 2 and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused victim 2 to engage in commercial sex acts, knowing and in reckless disregard for the fact that victim 2 was engaging in commercial sex acts as a result of force, fraud, and coercion. Nima, why do this? Why create this separate charge for victim 2?
Jesse, the reason you want to create a separate charge for victim 2 is because you have that and language. And again, I'm not saying this is highly likely, but it's a possibility. The government's saying that Diddy sex trafficked victim 1, 2, and 3. Well, for some reason, the jurors think that Diddy sex trafficked 3, but not 2. You're going to get a not guilty on that count. So they separated it out, really out of an abundance of caution.
Wow. So they separated these counts. They separate these charges just in case he beats one of them. They saying beat them all. That's what you need to do. One by one, beat them all. And if you can't do that, they're going to send this man away for possibly a long time. Pay attention to what's going on. I'm just reporting a story. I don't know if the man did it or not. But this is what's going on. And you need to pay attention to what's going on. Because they'll throw you away too. Let's go.
Can I just stop you right there? What happens if the jury selection, jury instructions, jury, even though it says victims 1, 2, and 3 in this racketeering count, if you find that he sex trafficked either 1 or 2 or 3, he's still guilty of it. Couldn't they say that? Or you need this separate charge?
You can absolutely address this issue in the verdict form. Doesn't necessarily need to be split up in the indictment. For some reason, maybe there was just a different story with respect to victim 2. Victim 1, we all believe, or at least I believe, is Cassie Ventura, right?
That's fair.
So
That's fair. Yep.
I think, and then victims 2, 3, and 4 now, or witness 4, who's going to testify. We don't know who they are, and we're going to talk about it. I'm sure they want to remain anonymous or at least be identified by just their initials. So, to the extent that victim 2 has a different story than Cassie Ventura, obviously Cassie Ventura was in a long-term relationship with Combs, spanning more than a decade. We've all seen the video from the hotel here in Los Angeles that CNN was able to obtain. Probably victim 2 has a different sex trafficking story, and I think that's why the government, out an abundance of caution, wanted to separate her out. Let's say she or he was a commercial sex worker.
She.
Yeah, it's a she. She was a commercial sex worker and wasn't necessarily someone that Combs was in a long-term relationship with. Maybe better just to separate her story out so she can tell it, and it's not.
So they saying maybe this woman, this victim 2, was a commercial sex worker.
Wow.
That he flew out and paid. Well, if she was a commercial sex worker, then that's what she was looking for. She was looking to get paid for her services. Right or wrong? Let's go. Pay attention.
And in order to get a conviction against them, why not include this at the second superseding indictment. I mean, they could have made that a separate charge. Why wait for this one? Was there additional evidence that they look back on and said, maybe we weren't as clear as we could be? Why not just do it? I think it was at the beginning of March when the second one came out.
I think that's probably it. They're preparing for trial and they're saying, you know what, maybe we pled this in a way that we shouldn't have. And look, they're not just thinking about the trial, Jesse. They're thinking about the inevitable appeal that's going to follow if Combs is convicted. Obviously, he has essentially unlimited money. And the last thing you want is a Second Circuit or some appellate court looking at this and saying, well, this was, unconstitutionally vague, or the jury conflated all this evidence together. So I think just the best practice was, let's separate victim 2 out. And maybe this evidence sort of came to light because, look, there's reportedly more than 100 victims. Obviously, the government's not going to put 100 victims on the stand. We know many of them have filed civil lawsuits. They're going to pick.
This man just said it's reportedly 100 victims. Remember now, they claiming that this stuff happened between 2004 and 2024. A 20-year span. They said his enterprise, the Diddy enterprise, started human trafficking / sex trafficking from the years, what was it, 2004 to 2024. That's a 20-year span. They saying this man didn't do this. So they can go back on you and say that you might have flew her out. You might have flew her out to have some fun.
Oh my God.
And she can turn around and say, I was coerced into doing it. Or I was forced into doing it. Pay attention.
Can choose the people they think are their best victims, right? The 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever the case may be. There's other prior bad acts witnesses. So during their witness prep and trial prep, maybe they thought, you know what, victim 2 has a different separate story. Let's plead her separately.
I think that's a really, really good point that you make there, and that makes sense to me. So now let's go into the second difference in this new grand jury indictment. So the prosecution's letter reads, quote, second, count 1 has been amended to include a second special sentencing factor related to the new sex trafficking offense charged in count 4. So buried in the indictment is some new information about special sentencing factors. And in the second superseding indictment, this section contained only one part. Now, in the third one, the third indictment, it has 2. So the first covers years 2009 to 2018, and it reads from at least in or about 2009 up to and including in or about 2018 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, as part of his agreement to conduct and participate in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity. Sean Combs, the defendant, agreed to, in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly recruited, enticed, harbored, transport, provide, obtain, advertise, maintain, patronize, and solicit by any means a person knowing and in reckless disregard of the fact that means of force, threats of force, fraud, and coercion and any combination of such means would be used to cause the person to engage in a commercial sex act. A lot of
word in there, like he was about to say. There's a lot of word in there. Buckets and buckets of words. But the important words are force, fraud, coercion, violence, or the threat of violence. Those are the most important words that they just said. Because if they find you guilty of that, they can give you up to life in prison. Pay attention to what's going on here. You don't want to get caught up in this. Let's go. Legalize your campaign.
Basically say Combs knew that people were allegedly being recruited and sometimes coerced into performing these commercial sex acts. This was intentional, right? Now, the second part of the special sentencing factor, this section, says the exact same thing, word for word, but now in this new indictment refers to in or about 2021 up to and including in or about 2024. So referring to victim 2. Nemo, again.
Oh, they're going back to 2021 to 2024 for the second victim. The original charges are from 2004 to 2024. But the second victim and this third superseding indictment is a person that supposedly came in 2021 to 2024. He flew him in, or however they got there, and he took care of him financially for favors, they say. Now, this person supposedly came out there for that. But let's go. Pay attention.
Why do this?
Again, victim 2, right? Seems like this third superseding indictment is all about victim 2. She is going to be a very important part of the story in this case. And it's going to be interesting to see how the defense handles Cassie Ventura. They might say that this is a disgruntled ex. It was settled the very next day. We're assuming that there was some significant payout. We don't know what the story is with respect to victim 2, but it's clear that that is going to be a very big part of the case. It's not just Cassie who's going to be the star witness. Victim 2 is going to take the stand, and that may be the victim that's going to add to victim 1's story that ultimately puts Diddy away.
Interesting gap, by the way.
Let me go back on that for 1 second.
Victim 2, but it's clear that that is going to be a very big part of the case. It's not just Cassie who's going to be the star witness. Victim 2 is going to take the stand, and that may be the victim that's going to add to victim 1's story that ultimately puts Diddy away.
So they're using this third superseding indictment that they just dropped on him a month before his trial starts to try to make sure they put the nail in his coffin. Give him life in prison. That's what it sounds like. Or up to life in prison. Remember that now. And also, a lot of states are changing the laws with these trafficking / human trafficking to make them mandatory minimums, 15 to 20 years on the state level. Pay attention.
Interesting gap, by the way, right? 2019 to 2021, or is it that, why did it start on 2021? Is that when this alleged relationship, this alleged illegal act started? I mean, interesting that you have that gap right there, right?
Definitely. And obviously the government's arguing that this was continuous, dating back 20 years now, going back to 2004. But we don't know who victim 2 is, when she entered Combs's life, what her story is. But the fact that she's more recent is also going to be more helpful. As these allegations become older, they're tougher to prove. Witness memories can not be as good. Evidence can disappear. So the fact that we have a victim now that is within the past 5 years bodes well for the prosecution.
And it was, this alleged conduct was happening in 2024, right? So after he was sued by Cassie Ventura, settled that lawsuit, then was hit with more lawsuits. That's significant too.
Oh, no question, because the Cassie Ventura lawsuit was around November 2023, if I recall correctly. That's when the statute of limitations was running there in New York State. So to the extent that we have conduct continue after that bombshell lawsuit was filed, that's very good for the prosecution.
Okay, now I want to get into the third big substantive change in this third superseding indictment. So it says, the government's letter says, quote, the third superseding indictment charges the Mann Act in 2 separate counts, in counts 3 and 5, covering conduct for victim 1 and victim 2, respectively. The second superseding indictment previously charged this conduct as a single Mann Act offense. And if we read this new count,
the Mann Act was introduced first, and it's still a factor in this. What is the Mann Act? Let's slow down for a minute. What is the Mann Act? Give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. The Mann Act, also known as the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910, is a U.S. federal law that prohibits the transportation of individuals across state or national borders for illegal sexual activities. This is an act from 1910, still on the law books, still official. You see it right there. The act was passed in 1910 to combat human trafficking and prostitution. It is named after Illinois Congressman James Robert Mann. This is one of the acts that they hit. What's the boxer name? But anyway, let's get back to this.
Brand new count 5 in the third superseding indictment. It now says, quote, from at least in or about 2021 up to and including in or about 2024 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Sean Combs, and then it says, knowingly transported individuals in interstate and foreign commerce with intent that the individuals engage in prostitution and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the same, to wit, Combs transported, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the transportation of multiple individuals, including but not limited to victim 2 and commercial sex workers in interstate and foreign commerce on multiple occasions with the intent that they engage in prostitution.
Wow. They're trying to hit this man with the whole book. This human trafficking and trafficking is real serious business. They say he flew some willing participants out. Willing participants now. They said these were workers that he flew out. This is very interesting. And I really hope you people paying attention out there.
So Nima, back to you. It's all about victim 2 here, right? And adding this specific charge, the transportation to engage in prostitution charge for victim 2. I go back to this idea, why wasn't it initially charged this way? And it's significant that they do this, and it makes me wonder if they're making the change this late in the game, does it potentially show a weakness in their case or a weakness on how they're going to present this to the jury?
Well, Jesse, it's the same reason, like you said, the reason the sex trafficking of victim 2 was put in a separate count. Now, victim 2, whether it's a different story, whether it's a different timetable, maybe Cassie's sex trafficking or the prostitution stopped at 2019 and they want to pick it back up in 2021. For whatever reason, the government thinks that those stories should be told separately in separate counts, and that's going to be part and parcel of their strategy in this case. I don't necessarily think it shows weakness. I think there's plenty of individuals that are going to tell similar stories of physical and sexual violence, but for some reason, this is just a different chapter in the same book.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Now that I'm going to go to a different change that I don't quite understand on the face of it. So the government writes in their letter to the court, in addition, the language of count 1 contains 2 non-substantive changes clarifying that the defendant kidnapped and carried and displayed a firearm to female victim and that the defendant dangled a female victim over an apartment balcony. Let me explain that.
This compacted with the elements of a firearm and the accusations of holding her over a balcony and the threats, like I said, threats, force, fraud, coercion, threats of violence or violence. Hold on a second. Let's go.
A little bit more. So you go to this section of the third superseding indictment and it says it's part of count 1, the racketeering case. When employees, witnesses to his abuse, or others threatened Combs' authority or reputation, Combs and members and associates of the enterprise engaged in acts of violence, threats of financial and reputational harm, and verbal abuse. These acts of violence included arson and multiple acts of kidnapping, including one instance of kidnapping during which Combs carried and displayed a firearm to a female victim, so that part is new. In addition, on multiple occasions, Combs threw both objects and people, as well as hit, dragged, choked, and shoved others.
They said he threw objects at people, threatening them with guns. Not just him, but the guys around him was helping him. That's what they accusing him of. If they find him guilty of any of this, they can get this man life in prison. Really need to see what's going on right here. They get this man life in prison. This is serious business.
On one occasion, Combs dangled a female victim over an apartment balcony. Now, that addition, Nima, of female and female, to clarify that, this is not, I mean, in fairness, this is not a paper for my doctoral thesis where I want to make sure everything is as specific as possible. Why does it matter? Why do they have to add female victim? If aren't they gonna argue that anyway at trial? I don't understand why they had to be so precise there.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a female or a male. We're talking about RICO predicate acts, right? So obviously under the statute, you have to have 2 or more of these acts, and we've gone through them: kidnapping, arson, extortion, other crimes of violence. But it can be to a male, it could be to a female. I don't think that's going to change the case one way or another. So you're right, Jesse, it's not necessary to identify whether the victim was male or female.
And you know what's interesting? We've talked about this before. This balcony incident, this is consistent with the account of a woman named Brianna Bana Bangolan, who filed a lawsuit against Combs last year. She claimed back in September of 2016, while sleeping at Ventura's apartment, Combs barged in, groped her breasts, dangled her off a 17-story balcony. She claims in the suit that she almost died and that Ventura had to step in to stop this. So if that is who we may be thinking, and now you would have someone who maybe would be supporting witness to Cassie Ventura's account, again, assuming she's victim 1, that's my take, Nima. I don't think I'm that far off.
No, that sounds absolutely right. Obviously, that's a horrible thing to allegedly happen to anyone. But
so this victim might be a friend of Cassie's, they say.
Wow.
A friend that was in a room. They say this man came in and groped her, then held her over a balcony. Boy, he better hope this not true. Once again, force, fraud, coercion, violence, or the threats of violence. You don't want to get accused of this. You do not want to get accused of these charges.
you would think that there's not multiple people that were dangled off a balcony by Sean Diddy Combs, and that probably is her. And at least from the government's perspective, she's going to be testifying in this case.
Now, you mentioned this before. At the end of the letter, the prosecution says it's produced all discovery.
Now, remember, they already got a settlement in the Cassie case. So they more than likely going to believe, the jury will believe what this woman is saying, what the new, if it's her, if it's the friend that they say he barged in on, groped her and held her over a balcony. Pay attention.
Sachs material, which is, basically the statements of government witnesses who are going to be testifying, which isn't affected by this new indictment because it seems to concern the same two victims. And the letter also notes that the government doesn't expect this third superseding indictment to affect existing pretrial deadlines. You mentioned it before that Combs is looking to go to trial as immediately as possible, try to, get an acquittal, try to get out of there. But I wonder, is this fair to the defense? Is this trial still going to happen May 5th?
I do think the trial is still going to happen May 5th because ultimately, Jesse, we know it's the defendant's right to a speedy trial, and the defense is going to ask for a continuance. If they say, listen, you're dropping this on us at the 11th hour, if they don't make the request for a continuance, then the judge is going to keep the trial date.
So now I have one final thing I have to ask you about. This is putting aside the third superseding indictment. So the government filed with the court a motion in limine, and basically, that's regarding how evidence will be limited or restricted in a trial. And the government argues that pursuant to the Crime Victims' Rights Act, the court needs to put in some measures to protect the privacy of some of the alleged victims who plan to testify, namely victims 2, 3, and 4, not victim 1. The prosecutors indicated that victim 1, again, who we believe to be Cassandra Ventura, is prepared to testify under her own name, revealing herself. But essentially, with regard to the other victims, they're arguing that they should be referred to by pseudonyms, that the defense can't elicit personally identifiable details of them when they have an opportunity to cross-examine these witnesses, that the court seal certain exhibits to protect their identities. And really what the prosecutors highlighted was that their testimony is going to be extremely sensitive and personal. I mean, think about what they're going to be testifying to, and that this will cause them embarrassment and anxiety and social stigma if their identities are revealed, both for them and their families. And the prosecution supports that with a legal argument. For example, they say the confrontation clause may guarantee defendants a right to cross-examine and confront their witnesses or confront the government's witnesses, but it's not absolute. And the prosecutors even cited the Ghislaine Maxwell case where victims were allowed to testify under pseudonyms. Nima, good argument?
It's an okay argument, and it's really up to the discretion of Judge Subramanian, but there's a presumption that trials in this country are public and they're accessible to the public. And really testifying under a pseudonym or filing documents under seal, that's the exception rather than the rule. Now, under the federal rules, judges do have a lot of discretion, and they look at factors like potential harm to the victim, the sensitive nature of the testimony, but ultimately, we're talking about a criminal trial, and I respect victims, but the person that probably has the most rights here is Sean Diddy Combs. And to the extent that he objects to this, I would probably guess that the victims may not have this protection that the government is asking for.
Why does the defense need to know this? I mean, they know who these people are. Why do they want them to not have to testify under pseudonyms? Why does that affect their case?
For the same reason why Combs' civil defense lawyers, they're trying to out and identify the victims. And the judges in those civil cases have ruled, at least some of them, that the victims, that they want to proceed with these allegations against Combs in civil court, where we're just talking about money, they do have to identify themselves. And not only is he a civil defendant, but he's a criminal defendant. And to the extent that the defense makes a colorable argument that this affects his ability to try the case fairly.
Right.
And obviously we all know about the Sixth Amendment confrontation clause. I do think on balance, judges tend to side with the defense.
In a few states passed state laws where if you've been accused of this and found guilty of this, you can be sued. You can be sued by the alleged victim. If you're found guilty of this, you can be sued. Pay attention.
Sure.
An appeal is inevitable.
And I agree. So there's a number of civil cases that we've seen where the judges have said you have to identify yourself. And I think the fair argument is you're the one who filed the lawsuit. You're the one who made it public. The defendant has a right to know who you are. And yes, from a defense point of view, if you're putting the...
And it should be that way. If you're the one that filed the lawsuit against somebody or press the charges, then the person that the charge were pressed against should be able to know who you are. Pay attention.
To identify themselves, they may drop the lawsuit. They might not want to continue. It is different in a criminal case. Assuming for a moment that these other alleged victims didn't file lawsuits against Sean Combs, they're not choosing to be government witnesses. I mean, maybe some of them did, but they're subject to a subpoena, right? If they say, hey, we don't want to testify, government, can't the government come back and be like, too bad, you have to? No?
Of course, government can compel their testimony. Obviously, they're going to have a much stronger argument if they haven't filed a civil lawsuit, they've never identified themselves, they don't want to testify. I'm sure that's something the judge would consider. It's just, again,
yeah.
I understand the argument. Just my prediction, given how these cases are typically handled, oftentimes, and it's sad, and we've seen it time and time again, it can be Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, victims of sexual assault do have to testify. Now, sometimes the media doesn't identify them, even though they're testifying publicly in court, and that's decisions that media companies make, but It's really the exception rather than the rule that they can testify under some pseudonym.
Nima Rahmani, so good seeing you. Thank you so much for breaking down these changes with me. Such a pleasure, as always.
Thanks for having me, Jesse. Talk soon.
So after we wrapped up this interview with Nima Rahmani, turns out Sean Combs' legal team issued a formal response to this third superseding indictment, and it says, These are not new allegations or new accusers. These are the same individuals, former long-term girlfriends who were involved in consensual relationships. This was their private sex life, defined by consent, not coercion.
There you have it. Defined by consent and not coercion. So that's going to be his defense, that they all consented to this. And he might have a chance. Seems like they flew out on their own accord, especially if they claim to be workers, adult consensual workers. Then they knew what they was getting into. They were paid for their services. Hey, now this. Oh, but before we get up out of here, I want to go right here. So it's no guessing involved. This is it right here. Human trafficking defined. Forced labor is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion, or for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude. Pay attention. These are the definitions. These are the words that they're using. Force, fraud, coercion. You do not want to get caught up in this. 2025, we still all the way live. Find something legal to do. International Star Media, the Gold Star Standard. At the Gold Star Standard. Reactions, reviews, and news you can use. Once again, I am your host, International Yada, for the records and the dollars, and we will see you on the next one.